most valuable player in the Stanley Cup playoffs is Brian Leetch.
The first American-born player to ever win the Conn Smythe Trophy.
There is a specific kind of dread that the best defensive defensemen in hockey history produce in opposing players. It is different from the dread of facing a dominant forward, a dangerous forward you can see coming. You can track him. You can position yourself between him and the net, and at least feel like the geometry of the situation is working in your favor. An elite offensive defenseman destroys that geometry entirely. He attacks from behind you. He changes the shape of the play from a position where you cannot watch him and watch the puck at the same time. He makes the ice feel smaller and the options feel fewer and the clock feel faster all at once. Brian Leetch did all of that, and then he did something on top of it that the men who played against him are still struggling to put into words 30 years later. He made it look effortless, and that was the most terrifying part of all. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. Before anyone talks about what it felt like to stand on the wrong side of the ice from Brian Leetch, let us look at what the record actually shows. Because the record is the starting point, and the starting point here demands attention. Leetch finished his career with 247 goals and 781 assists for 1,028 points as a defenseman. A defenseman, the all-time points record for an American-born player in NHL history belonged to him until Mike Modano retired. He won the Norris Trophy twice as the best defenseman in the league. He won the Conn Smythe Trophy in 1994 as playoff MVP. He was the first American-born player ever to win that award. He did it by producing 34 points in 23 playoff games while carrying the New York Rangers to their first Stanley Cup in 54 years. Those numbers are not the biography of a great defenseman. They are the biography of one of the most complete players the sport has ever seen, regardless of position. Brett Hull scored 741 goals in the NHL. He spent his career on the ice against the best defensemen of his generation and developed an understanding of what made a defenseman genuinely dangerous from the perspective of the person trying to get past him. Hull said that Leetch was the only defenseman he faced who made him think about what he himself was doing wrong before he had even done anything wrong yet. That the anticipation Leetch brought to every situation created a feeling that your next move was already known before you made it. Hull said that most defensemen react. Even the great ones react with exceptional speed and exceptional instinct, but they are still fundamentally responding to something you initiated. Leetch did not feel that way. He felt like he had already read the sequence 2 steps ahead and was simply waiting in the place the puck was going to be. Hull scored on everyone. That is not a small admission from him. Mike Modano played against Leetch throughout his prime years and understood from the inside what it meant to compete against someone operating at that level of defensive and offensive intelligence. Simultaneously, Modano said that Leetch presented a problem that most defensemen did not present. The threat he carried coming out of his own zone. Most elite defensemen make you cautious on the attack because of their physical presence or their defensive positioning. Leetch made you cautious because the moment you overcommitted to anything offensive, you knew he was already transitioning, and by the time you turned around, he was gone and the puck was moving the other direction with a speed and precision that felt completely unfair given that he had been defending 3 seconds earlier. That transition, that ability to shift from defending to attacking with no visible gear change in between, that was the thing that separated Leetch from every other defenseman of his era, and placed him in a conversation that very few players at any position ever enter. Mike Richter played with Leetch for years and watched him from the most intimate possible distance. Richter was an elite goaltender who understood what a defenseman looked like from behind him and what different defensemen did for the architecture of a team. Richter said that having Leetch on the blue line changed what was possible for the entire team in a way that went beyond individual plays. That the options available to everyone on the ice multiplied when Leetch was back there, because every opposing team had to account for what he could do, and accounting for what he could do required resources that then were not available elsewhere. Richter said opponents did not just have to defend against what Leetch actually did, they had to defend against what he might do, and defending against might in the NHL costs you something every single shift. That cost accumulates over 60 minutes, over a series, over a career of facing him. Pat Quinn coached against Leetch multiple times across his career, and spent years building game plans that attempted to account for what he brought to the ice. Quinn said something about Leetch that captures the core difficulty of facing him better than any statistic can. He said that Leetch had the ability to change a game from the blue line in ways that forwards simply could not replicate because of the angle and the surprise. When a dangerous forward makes a play, the play develops in front of you, and there is at least the possibility of adjusting to it as it unfolds. When Leetch made a play, it often came from behind the play entirely, and by the time it registered as a threat, it was already too late to respond to it at full effectiveness. Quinn said that coaching against that required conversations before games that felt less like tactical preparation and more like psychological preparation, getting players ready not just for what they would face physically, but for the feeling of something happening faster and from a direction they did not fully expect. That is what elite truly means at this level. Not just skill, the ability to produce a specific psychological effect in prepared and talented opponents before a puck ever drops. Adam Graves played alongside Leetch during the 1994 championship run and watched him carry that team through the hardest moments of a playoff run that the entire hockey world was watching. Graves said that in moments where other players felt the weight of the situation, Leetch seemed to feel something different. Not the absence of pressure, something more like a translation of pressure into precision. The bigger the moment, the more exact everything became. The decisions, the reads, the execution. Graves said there were shifts in that playoff run where the entire bench was watching Leetch and the arena was shaking and the game was on a knife edge, and he was out there looking like a man who had arranged for all of this to happen exactly as it was happening and was simply executing the plan. That quality, the ability to elevate rather than steady under pressure. That is the rarest thing in professional sports. Steadying under pressure is exceptional. Most elite athletes learn to do it. Elevating under pressure is something different entirely, and the list of players who have demonstrated it consistently at the highest level is very short. Eric Lindros was one of the most physically dominant forwards of his generation. He was built to overwhelm opponents in a way very few players in the history of the sport have been built. When Lindros talks about defensemen who genuinely affected how he played and what he thought about before games, he does not talk about players who hit him hardest or skated fastest in isolation. He talks about players who made the ice feel different, who changed the geometry of the game simply by being on it. He put Leetch in that category without hesitation, said that going into games against the Rangers required a specific mental adjustment that other games did not require because Leetch could take something that looked like an offensive advantage and turn it into a defensive disaster in the space of one transition. That is what the great offensive defensemen do at their absolute peak. They do not just cancel your advantages. They convert them into their own. The 1994 playoff run is the permanent evidence of what Brian Leetch was capable of when everything was at stake and the entire world was watching. 34 points in 23 games as a defenseman in the playoffs, at a time when the Rangers had not won a championship in over half a century, and the weight of that history was sitting on every player in that locker room every single night. Leetch did not just perform under that weight. He performed at a level that had never been achieved by an American-born player in that context before and has not been replicated since. The Conn Smythe was unanimous. The performance was not even close to being arguable. Mark Messier was the captain of that team, the leader, the man brought in specifically to carry a franchise through exactly that kind of moment. And Messier said publicly and without qualification that Leetch was the best player on that team during that run. When Mark Messier says that about someone in the context of a championship run, you stop and listen carefully because Messier understood what best looked like from the inside better than almost anyone who has ever played the game. Brian Leetch never talked about what he did to opponents. He talked about preparation and competing and finding ways to make the team better. He said the game rewarded players who thought about it clearly and worked on the details relentlessly and trusted that doing both of those things completely would produce results that spoke for themselves. The results spoke for themselves for 18 seasons, and the men who had to stand on the opposite side of the ice from those results still remember exactly what that felt like. Every legend who lined up against Brian Leetch carries the same memory. The puck moving from his stick, the play developing faster than it should have, the feeling of geometry shifting beneath their feet. and the quiet, terrible understanding that they were watching something the sport had never quite seen before and might never see again.